We've got a log here from rscarawa. I should really not say these names out loud. Whatever. I've got a log here. Sorry it took me so long to get to your log. I usually try to check the video responses thread pretty regularly and make sure I don't get too far behind, but this was on a different thread. But here it is anyway. Um, and I suggested in another post some sample maneuvers that could help point out tuning issues. A strong punch out, cut the throttle at the top and kind of float at the top, let the copter fall. A punch out, let fall low throttle. A punch out at the bottom to arrest the fall. Some flips and rolls and hard turns. And so you've done those. I really appreciate it. I almost wish that there was a way we could kind of come up with a standard set of moves that people could do to to show off their tune, and we could come up with, you know, a set of videos that show different tunes in a standard set of maneuvers. In the shooting sports, there are some standard shooting drills that people do, and it's the same everywhere. It's, so many shots on targets for such a time or such a distance from such a position. And so if you do these drills, you can compare your times against other people in a meaningful way. And so that's more about a competition than anything else. But I wonder if we could come up with some kind of a standard set of maneuvers for tuning that would help compare tunes in a meaningful way. I don't know. Uh, anyway, let's have a look at your video and see what you got. So here we're going to see your punch out, and what I'm primarily looking for during a punch out is I'm listening for oscillations. If you have oscillations that come out at high throttle, you may have too high of a P gain somewhere, or you may need more TPA. And I'm also looking for the copter to tip or pitch forward or backward during the punch out, which may indicate that your I term is too low on pitch. So let's see what you got. So there were no, maybe the tiniest bit of oscillation I could see in the camera, but it could just be vibration. I mean, vibration is still a thing, especially if you have your camera hard mounted. I didn't hear in the motors. That's the most important thing. Oh, by the way, forget the trace I've got up. Don't worry about that right now. I didn't hear anything in the motors though. And we'll go back and listen again. For high frequency P-term oscillations, your ear is almost better than Blackbox. Listen. So we can just see the tiniest bit of vibration at the very beginning of the punch out, but the motors sound reasonably smooth. And at full throttle like that, if there was an issue, it definitely would come out. The other thing I see is that the copter rolls to the left and pitches, I think pitches forward a little bit. Yeah. Now let's watch your sticks to make sure that that's not commanded. And specifically, I'm going to watch your right stick, which is where pitch and roll are, at least for mode 2, which a lot of people fly, and which Blackbox always shows mode 2. So let's watch this stick and see if it comes off 0. And in fact, let's make that a little easier by bringing up RC commands pitch and RC command roll and see if they go off 0. Here we go. And sure enough, we're just a little to the left and a little forward. So there we go. And you can see it happening as I move it. It's pitching and rolling. So my concern was that that was related to your I term not being high enough, your I gain not being high enough, and that the strong punch out was causing the copter to lose its attitude control a little bit. But we can see by examining the logs that what's actually happening is that either intentionally or unintentionally, you're bumping the stick. So no problem there. And now you recentered. Okay. Now let's see what happens at the top of the punch out when you lower the throttle. Actually, back up. Here we go. And so you've dropped down to about 1300, which I would say, just as a matter of commentary, if you're going to do this drill, try and cut it even lower, even all the way down to 0, assuming that you're running PID at min throttle and you're running you've disabled motor stop. If you have motor stop enabled, then when you hit 0 throttle, you'll just tumble. So you don't want that. So ideally, though, you would not take it all the way down to 0. Ideally, you would take it just maybe to 1150 or something like that. So just barely above the 0 throttle min check point where the PID loop might turn off. So you're at 1300, which will still give us something, but actually 1300 for most copters, if you're hovering at around 1450 or 1500, 1350 is actually not a very aggressive descent. And that was a real eye-opener for me when I started really paying attention to my sticks. I thought I was getting real close to zero throttle, just chopping the throttle and falling, and I'm still at like 1350, 1300. It's not that much of a descent. So we'll take a look at it. But if you're going to do these drills and to check your tuning, try and get that throttle down to minimum 1200 or maximum 1200, maybe even 1150. And if you want to, you can even program your transmitter, assuming it can do this. You can program your transmitter with an idle up configuration, which I've got a thing on my channel about how to do that. So you can literally put the stick all the way at the bottom and it still will not go, the actual throttle value will not go to zero. It'll be just barely above zero. And so you'll maintain full attitude control while you're in this low throttle state. Let's have a look at this drop now. So at the moment that you chop the throttle, notice that the copter does not change attitude. See it again. See that very moment that you drop the throttle there, the copter does not sort of float upward in pitch or anything. And that's good. Again, that's suggesting that your eye gains are close to correct. They're not too low anyway. Maybe they're too high. That's a little harder to judge without being actually on the sticks, but they're definitely not too low. And now let's watch what happens at the bottom when you arrest the fall. So now again, that's RC command. So ideally when you're doing this stuff, you would not want to move the right stick. You would want to only have the PID algorithm making the changes. So at this moment where you punch the throttle, let's just slowly watch what happens as you raise the throttle. Here it goes. And we can see, interesting. It does nose up a little, doesn't it? That wasn't you. You're actually correcting. And then you correct by pushing forward. So we can see if we play this forward very slowly, as you throttle up, bam, right here, the copter noses up. And that's very interesting. Is that some kind of a vibration in the gyro or something? Well, I do see one thing. Look at your motors. Look at your back motors. There we go. So I think what might have happened is that your back motor's maxed out. Yeah, that's consistent. Your back motor's maxed out. Therefore, the copter was not able to pitch forward as strong as it wanted to. And then, of course, the copter pitched up. And you had to correct that then by adding some push forward, and that caused it to sort of level out. So I'm okay with that. Anytime you've got your motors maxing out like that because you're at very, very high throttle, you know you're in an edge of the envelope condition and you expect unusual things to happen. I'm okay with that. Overall, I'd say your eye gain, at least your pitch eye gain for sure, looks pretty solid. And the other ones, the roll is a little harder to judge with this because the copter tends to be pretty symmetrical about the roll axis in terms of the mass distribution. So you need less eye term correction on the roll axis. But the pitch axis can be really fiddly if you don't have enough eye gain. It can be just the copter can constantly be pitching and rolling forward and backward as you change the throttle, and you don't want that. That's so distracting. So it looks like you're in pretty good shape there. Okay, we've got another punch out here. Let's take a look at this one. So here we definitely have some oscillation. Now personally, I would want to try to tune that out. Now I don't have a bigger picture of your overall sort of flight envelope. Some people like to have their P gains high enough for normal flying that occasionally when they do a very strong punch out, they get a little oscillation. But the rest of the time when they're doing normal flying, they like the way it handles. I would want to look at this and see which of my axes was oscillating. It's probably pitch or roll. I guess roll is most likely. Where's the oscillation? Oh, there you go. There it is. It is roll, as usual. So this is a pretty typical P-term oscillation. Let's just take a quick look at it. Notice that it gets stronger and then settles as the system sort of stabilizes. So in an extreme case, it would get stronger and it would just stay strong. So you're kind of on the edge here. We have this oscillation, and then it settles and takes care of itself, even though notice your throttle is still up. The system sort of I don't know, the D term, maybe it manages to settle itself in. It's possible that since I don't see any indications of excess P gain the rest of the time, probably the thing to do is to try to tune this out with TPA. But it may make sense to reduce your roll P gain a little bit, depending on the overall flight performance. Also, frankly, the D term could probably be higher. So notice that the magnitude of your D is not quite as high as the magnitude of your P. And my experience, again, I'm not confident about this, but I feel like having the D being as high or maybe even a little higher than the P seems like the copters that are flying well. That's what I've seen. Also notice that your I term your I gain on roll may be too high. I don't know. That's a tough one to judge without flying it, but the fact that we're seeing the I term, these oscillations making it through to the I term, is a little surprising. I don't know. I wouldn't make that statement definitively. This is a relatively extreme condition, so maybe it's just that there's a lot of error and I term is doing its job. If we see I term oscillating like this too often, it may be an indication that I gain is too high. I term should generally not have higher frequency oscillations, but this is a pretty extreme scenario, so we'll probably let that go. Now we're at the bottom of that punch out and fall, and as you arrest the fall, same thing again. So roll P may be too high, possibly. So now you do some fast runs with sharp turns, and let's just play that back at a little bit slower speed. And again, we're just going to keep watching the roll. And in fact, let's just take a look at P and D. Just P and D. So here's some oscillation. Oscillation, really, really regular there. There's some oscillation, even though you're not really doing anything too extreme. Looking good here. Looking okay here. And now we're settled down again. Yeah, so this is all adding up to probably, it's not just it's not just high throttle and you need TPA to tame it, because we're seeing these same oscillations during forward flight and hard turns, even at lower throttle. And you might say, oh, well, some of this is just a prop wash scenario, but it doesn't feel that way to me. Those turns actually weren't quite so sort of sharp and speedy that I would call them prop wash scenarios. It's feeling like there's too much P gain on roll. So now you do some twitches, twitchy left and right twitches. Let's look at that. And you see how at the end there's a couple of bounces or whatever you want to. So that's definitely something you should be able to tune out on roll. On pitch, it's sometimes hard to get rid of the last little bit of that, but on roll, you should really be rock solid even on a 3S setup. You should really be able to get that really solid. Again, maybe if that was the only thing I was seeing, I would say you could add a little D, but it feels like maybe too much P. Now, what about pitch? Pitch is interesting because I'm seeing these little spikes here, and that feels to me like gyro noise getting in. Usually, it doesn't look like what's happening to you is P-term oscillation. P-term oscillation is, in my hunch, is it's not that high frequency. So the thickness of these lines is related to the frequency of the oscillation. Narrower ones are higher frequency. And I'm not seeing stuff that looks like excess P gain, so it almost makes me wonder if you might need, what's going on with your filtering. Oh, I'm almost out of time. Yeah, this copter looks a little noisy. Looks a little noisy, frankly. But I kind of find it hard to judge that with what Boris has been doing lately. I'm not in tune with that. But he might need more filtering, and especially on roll. Anyway, I don't know. I'm out of time for this video, though. I hope it was helpful, and happy flying.